Redo of a 2 against Adam I did in class. Okay. Adam makes a boneheaded mistake by conceding competing interpretation in his last speech and only go for defaults on theory. The way the round breaks down is fairness conceding is a voting issue, and the fact that he violates my interpretation that he shouldn't be able to run the framework he runs about democracy and inclusion with the framework he runs about specifying felony reenfranchisement. That's conceded. He violates. He also concedes fairness of voter and competing interpretation, which means as long as I win a risk of offense, i.e. some marginal link to abuse coming off my interpretation, I win the round. So, as a group, I guess all of his defensive arguments. First, you reject all of his defensive arguments because it doesn't mean counter interpretation means under competing interpretation. Zika has no world whatsoever. Even if he's winning these defensive arguments, he needs a counter interpretation that he should endorse that says that is at least equally powerful to my interpretation. The fact that he doesn't endorse a counter interpretation means that there is always the risk that my interpretation is better because we don't even know what the world endorsed for debate looks like. Second is the fact that you shouldn't believe in terminal defense. He's not framing these terminal defense. There's always an epistemic risk that his arguments are falsely. He's not claiming any offensive arguments. He's not even claiming terminal defensive arguments, which means that he would be interventionist to make that extrapolation for him. Look, in this last speech, he literally just blitzed out a bunch of defensive arguments. That is neither A, not explain why they would function as terminal defense, which would be necessary under competing interpretations, or prevent you from pulling the trigger on theory, or B, doesn't even articulate why they might have a risk of offense implications, or that even articulate them as terminal defensive arguments, regardless of whether or not there was a warrant for that in the first place, which means the only way you can interpret these as a mere mitigatory defense means I'm winning a risk of offense. But even if you don't buy that or those arguments, you should also just reject all of his arguments on face because they just blitzed them out and was entirely unclear on what the actual implications or how these arguments function. Where he literally just made 5 arguments within 30 seconds, very blippily, each one sentence long. There is no way you actually flowed all of them, which means that if you didn't flow a single one of those arguments, then you shouldn't evaluate any of them because they were all incredibly unclear. Which means that I don't know if there's an inconsistency between your flow and my flow. We could have gotten different arguments, but it's unreasonable to expect me to have gotten all of them. And so those are all the independent reasons why you don't look to anything of what he's just said. But even if you don't buy that, I'm also going to be substantively proving why I'm winning a risk of offense. So those are come before any sort of argument he makes. Even if he extends those arguments, these all function as prior takeouts because test how the arguments function and whether or not you should be evaluating them in the first place. Even if by that, you could also group all of his arguments. Even if he's winning there are arguments I could have made. Is always considering the fact that it was always going to be an uphill battle because of the fact that he parametricizes the interpretation. Even if it allows for a theoretical better division of ground, I couldn't necessarily have predicted what he parametricized to, which means that the fact he's running a hyperspecific framework with a hyperspecific components generated abuse. That means it's always going to be necessarily more difficult than something our ground argument that says that I don't necessarily have ground to turn the affirmative, or at least the ground is not of the same quality as his because he is more better prepped because his plan, and B, it's tailor-made for his framework. There's literally even if there are conceivably ways I could turn the framework that is not responsive to the claim that whether or not that those turns are actually good ground for me. But also, that claim is ridiculous. None of these turns actually turn the affirmed as per his articulation in the AC. He says political inclusion is the first thing that comes for what comes first in the standard, which means that the weighting is embedded within the standard itself. The fact that including people had all his link to the standard, even if he says I can make arguments why the plan would have harmful repercussions in the long run, that is not what's relevant actually under a standard. As per cross-examination, you can cross-play that what he said in cross-examination that feeds the abuse story. Also, he says he kicks out of it, that solves abuse. That's a issue of reject the argument, not the debater, but he doesn't actually articulate an argument. You can extend the fact that rejecting the argument makes debate being abusive a no-risk issue because he can just go for, make abusive arguments and hopes he get away with it and then kick the argument if it's discovered, which encourages abuse in the long run. It also creates a time skew because he kicks it for a positive time trade-off. That deals kicks care of that argument. Yeah, so vote neg on theory.